Thank you. All right, thanks everybody. And I have popped some of these on the chairs. Hopefully I won't cough through this session. So some of these, because this is kind of what we're going to be doing today. So just a little bit about your baby's day. And there's been some talks I've noticed already about safe sleeping. Is that better? And I think the session after me is actually, is about safe sleeping. So it's a good tie-in together. So we're going to talk a bit about your baby's day and what you might expect and what some of the things you could be doing with your baby. All right. So what we'll be looking at, so how often should my baby be feeding? And what are the expected sleeping patterns for my baby? Have you heard the session, sleeps like a baby? Who's got a baby that doesn't sleep? Anybody? You may have one. When should I introduce solids? That's one of the other things. So that really starts to change your routine, starts to change what your day might look like. And what's really important, which some of the things we forget sometimes, we always talk about feed, we always talk about sleep, but what we don't talk enough about is play and activities from birth. Okay, so playing with your baby is a really important thing from very early on. Sounds weird, you're not going to go kick a soccer ball with your baby when they're first born, but certainly singing to them, reading to them, smiling with them, they're all activities, so you can never underestimate them, and they're an important part of the daily routine with your baby. So when we're thinking about how often should my baby be feeding, we have a feed, play, sleep cycle. So this is an interesting one, and maybe something a bit different, because often we get these things turned around a little bit. So when your baby actually wakes up from a sleep, that's a really good time to do the feed. Okay, who might be feeding to sleep? So they might be swapped around. Often we have sleep and feed get swapped around a lot. Okay, and then we'll talk a little bit about what that might mean and what that can do for your day. So when your baby wakes up, have a feed, nice full belly, and then we might have a play. Okay, so play is an important part of every time they're awaking, except at night time. You don't want to do too much play. You want to kind of get them back down into sleep fairly quickly. Okay, and then their sleep cycle. So feeding can vary for children. Okay, when your baby's born, if you're breastfeeding, it could be normal to feed up to 12 times a day. Sounds like a lot, doesn't it? Okay, but if you're breastfeeding, your baby might only feed 6 times a day. But on average, we're looking at about 8 feeds a day when your baby's first born. With formula, it might be a little bit less, maybe 6, it might be 7. Okay, so around about 8 feeds a day from very early on. And that's in the 0 to 6 week period. Lots of things happening there, lots of changes. But certainly play should still be part of that, and we'll talk about that in a little while. Okay, so what are the expected sleeping patterns for my baby? So when we talk about normal childhood sleep patterns, I would like to say there's a blanket statement around what's normal, but we're all very different. Okay, so the amount of sleep I need a night might be different from the amount of sleep you need every night. Okay, so and babies are the same. Even though they're babies and they're all the same age, there's no one blanket statement. So we have a range. We think about how much time my baby might need. And so those little handouts that I've given you have kind of given you an idea. It might be 1.5 hours to about 3 hours. Okay, so when they're in that 0 to 6 week period very early on. Sorry, I'll got that for you. And the other interesting thing is that sleep is a learned behaviour. Although we want to sleep, but learning to sleep or fall asleep, particularly by ourselves or with some support, is something that we learn, that babies actually don't innately know how to do that. If you think about when your baby's born, they've come from a nice, warm, safe womb. They can hear you. You can take them everywhere. But actually when they come out, they're like, oh, hello, how am I going to fall asleep? And so that's something that we may have to learn or teach them. Your baby may be unsettled in the evenings for up to 4 hours for the first 6 months. Now, doesn't that sound enticing, okay? So that usually happens late afternoon, early evening. And we don't, there's a lot of theories about why it happens. But all we know is that they do happen. If we ask parents, they've got this unsettled period, and that's very stressful for the parents. Because it's usually the time if you've got a partner who's gone back to work, they've come back home, you want to eat dinner, you want to sit down together. And so that can be a really tricky time. But it's very normal. And so I usually say to parents, if you can either, if you have a pouch, that's a great thing to use at that time, because there's usually not much you can do to settle them through that. It's like put them in a pouch, they'll cat nap through that time, and then between a feed, and then you can get them settled and then go to sleep for that night time. Okay, so you kind of have to just roll with it. Most babies tend to be late afternoon, early evening. Some babies might have that a little bit, it may change that. And it's not uncommon for a baby to wake 2 to 3 times per night until they're about 6 months old. Okay, so sleeping through the night. When will my baby sleep through the night? That's one of the questions we get. When am I going to get my sleep back? If your baby sleeps from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m., we would say that's sleeping through the night. Okay, all right. So they still maybe wake, like I said, 2 to 3 times per night. So still having a feed at 10 o'clock, they still might have those 3 to 4 hour feeds throughout overnight. Very normal. Okay, sometimes they might go a little bit longer as they get a little bit older and closer to 6 months. But I think it's helpful to understand that if you hear things or see, hear all the things and stories that people have got to tell you, oh, my baby slept through the night from 6 weeks. It's very rare, and I've yet to really meet someone who actually sleeps through the night at that age. We want your baby to feed that much. We want your baby to be able to do that, because that's when they're feeding and they're growing, and it keeps your supply up, particularly if you're breastfeeding. Okay, so responsive settling. So certainly when it's time for sleep and we're teaching our babies how to sleep and fall asleep, we would never advocate for control crying or just letting your baby fall asleep by themselves. So we really need to respond to your baby. If they're tired, they're showing you some tired signs, then it's time to get them into bed. And the responsive settling is, how much does my baby need me right now? How much support does my baby need me to get them to sleep at this time? Okay, so it's really important to respond to your baby. You know your baby better than anybody. You'll get to know them very quickly after they deliver and you have them. You have to listen to your baby and watch your baby's cues. They're telling you when they're tired. So in those little handouts are some things around tired signs, and they're the cues. They're the things your baby's telling you, I am tired, I need to go to sleep. So try, as soon as you see those, they're the time where you need to get your baby thinking about, okay, we've had our feed, we've had our play, look for the tired signs, now it's time to get into sleep. Okay. And so when you put your baby down to sleep, they may cry a little bit. The little whingy, they're kind of settling themselves down. Babies are very noisy when they go into bed. They make lots of grunts, lots of noises, and they're squirming a lot. Okay, but as your baby's distress increases, then you really need to respond to that. So you can settle your baby in the cot, pat them, shh, lots of shushing sounds. The rhythmic pattern on the mattress or just on their thigh is very soothing for them. But if they're really crying, they may need you to give them a cuddle. Pick them up, shh, it's okay, mummy's here, daddy's here. Put them back down in the cot and you keep going. Okay, and there'll be something in you when they're really distressed that says, I need to pick them up. Pick them up. You may read things and hear things, and people give you all the advice in the world. Everyone's got an opinion on parenting and sleeping. Okay? They're going to say, oh, just let them cry it out. Okay? And that's really not helpful. It's not helpful for you because it makes you feel, I really want to pick up my baby and give them a cuddle. Then you should do that. Okay. So any questions about feeding? So we talked about breastfeeding. We're feeding about, anywhere between 6 to 12 times a day. Formula, often around 8 times a day. In terms of your baby's sleep, we said still waking 2 to 3 times a night under the age of 6 months. Okay, so if you've got a partner around, the two of you can help with that. That would be really good, because it's good to try and get some, even if you get 4 hours back to back, that is a great sleep. You're going to feel much better with that. Okay, so when shall I introduce solids? So moving on now. So we're saying around 6 months to introduce solids. So you would have heard some stuff in the media recently about allergies, and we should be introducing them earlier. So introducing solids has gone full circle. We've gone back to looking at babies around 6 months, and they should be showing you signs of wanting to feed. Okay, so that means when you're eating, your baby's mouth will be open, almost like they want some. Okay, and they'll lose what we call their tongue thrust. So when a little baby is having solids and it's too early, they actually push it out. They actually go. They don't know actually how to put it back in. Okay, so there's some of the signs. And they need to have good head control. So if your baby's really little, you can't give them anything to eat because they're like that. Around about 6 months, your baby will actually have really good head control and be able to have their mouth open and accept the spoon and be able to swallow the food. And they can indicate when they're hungry or full. So when they push away, they don't want it anymore. They're letting you know, I've had enough. Thank you. No more. Okay, that's a really good sign as well. And we talked about the tongue losing the tongue thrust. And it's interesting about showing interest in food of what others are eating. As your children grow, you will have exactly the same thing on your plate. But your child, and they will have theirs, but they will want yours. Even though it's the same, they will want yours always. So encouraging regular meal time, sitting down together is important. So there are some really good websites in terms of what you should be introducing. So when we say there is some research around allergy. So when you introduce foods, you should really introduce iron-rich foods. So things like meat, fish, iron-fortified cereals, those type of things straight away. So we don't do that anymore where we say you have a little bit of rice cereal and then you have a little bit of vegetables and you do it one by one. Now it's kind of like you go for it. Okay, and even now we're not restricting the recommendations from the NHMRC guidelines if you give peanut butter, all of those things very early, because that's what we're saying in terms of allergies. We stopped giving them very early and we had a spike in allergies, food allergies, and where the research is suggesting that our slow introduction of solids is one of those things. But it's really important that you do keep breastfeeding your child through that. Okay, breast milk is still the most important thing, but the iron stores are not enough anymore for your child from 6 months. So really, your child should be on solids by 6 months. Okay, so play and activities with my baby. So when we talked about the feed, now we're talking a little bit about play. So the most important thing that a child learns is actually through play and interaction. So when your baby cries and you pick up your baby, you actually start to build your baby's brain. Okay, so all the brain development stuff for your child actually happens with the interactions with you very early on. Okay, so you know there's lots of great things out there on on devices and electronic things, but actually your face and your voice is the most important thing in terms of growing your baby's brain. Okay, so and that happens. So this smiling, the reciprocal, we call it the serve and return. So they smile at you, you smile back. Their eyes light up. This keeps on going. Reading a book, talking, even when you're singing to them, anything. Talking when I'm changing a nappy. When they're born, from the moment they're born, you never stop that, ever. Okay, and when they're in the pram and they're looking at you, they will search for you. They'll look for your eyes because they're trying to build their brain. And that's what happens. That's what parents are responsible for. So the more parents and caregivers talk and respond to the child, the quicker he or she learns. Okay, so you can never underestimate that. So what are some of the things you can do with your baby? We talked about the laughing and the smiling and talking. So getting dressed, talking about them. Here's your hand, here's your arm, move your legs. Give them names. Interact with your baby, having a bath, the kicking, changing your baby's nappy, feeding, putting the baby to bed. All of these things are activities that your baby's learning, okay, all through that interaction. Even getting in the car. So the activities that happen in almost the same way every time, that's what we call routines. Okay, so babies and children respond really well, not just strict routines, but when the same thing happens over and over again, they can actually predict that. That actually makes them feel safe. They're like, I know what's going to happen now. I know when mum puts the wrap, when she wraps me, oh, I'm going to go to sleep now. That we're doing these things over and over again. And that's even more important as your children grow and become toddlers. Toddlers respond really well to those same things being done over and over again. Predictability, consistency, okay, with children. So interaction is the key. The best toy you can give your baby is you. Okay, so there's lots of great things here today, but don't forget you. Don't forget the interaction that you have with your baby. It actually forms the your baby's full day. Okay. So some of the other games you can play. Tummy time from birth. Okay, put your baby on, not to sleep, but when they're awake. And when they're born, they're going to like it for about 20 seconds, but you build on that. Okay, so tummy time, every wake time is really important. Mirror games. Babies love to look at themselves in the mirror, and that's why faces are really engaging from them. Ball play as they get older, hiding objects and toys. That's like peekaboo. You know, hide it. Where's it gone? Where's it gone? Cause and effect toys. So there's lots of those here today I've seen. Dancing and singing. So movement with your baby. You know, we kind of, as soon as you get a baby, we kind of do this. It's natural, okay? So dancing with your baby, singing. Tickles we talked about. Peekaboo. Bubbles. Bubbles are fantastic. If you want to distract a toddler in particular, get yourself a packet of bubbles. When they're little, toys that they can hit. So actually from around 3 months, babies actually discover their hands. They'll kind of do this, and then they go, oh, they're mine. I've actually got control of those, and they start hitting their toys more, okay, because they suck on them, and then they go, oh, they're attached. Okay, blocks are great. Cars and trucks and movement games. So a lot, just really, it's the engagement, okay, and that will grow as they get older. Okay, so do we have any questions? I guess the thing with the routine is that you will find your own routine, and be flexible. If you let your baby lead the day when they're first born, you'll get into a routine fairly much easier. If you do the same things over and over again, and don't be completely rigid very early on, then that would be very beneficial to you both. Okay, thank you.